Hello and well met. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to check out some more ChatGPT AI tool work and also Fantasy Grounds. So today I'm working on a project that started off as pretty much like an image and a concept. So yesterday, if you had watched the previous thing, I just had created a kind of like a project. So what this project does is it allows you to upload content, provide links, resources, that sort of thing, and then you contain all of your conversations within a project so that your conversation will be a little bit more focused. So this project is called Fantasy Grounds Content, and it just has like the SRD 5.2. It has my adventure template design, also has, or template, also has my rollable lists and the 5e NPC template. So this way I don't have to always keep giving it the information, although sometimes I still have to kind of mess with it, but it's a little better than just starting all over. So basically, this mountain town campaign idea is basically how this started. And what it happened is that I'll show you the original prompt. So it says, what would you call a campaign that takes place in and around a high mountain spanned by misty clouds, steep cliff trails, and old ancient stone bridges that were built before the dual city was finished? So there's basically a town or a city that's built way up in the mountains on a cliff, kind of like a cliff face, and there was a bridge there before, and both sides of the bridge basically grew into towns. Well, at one time it was one thing. It was like a united city, but over time, people who lived on either side of the bridge kind of slowly came apart. And when the leader died, or when the previous government uh, crumbled, essentially the schism happened, and the city split apart. So what I was looking for is a name. So I saw this Whispers of the Sky Roads, which I thought was kind of cool, but then I just kind of, say a little bit cliche, but then I came up with the Sky Roads Whisper, but that sounded kind of, I don't know, I didn't care for it too much, but it kind of went with it. And now it's called the Skyborne Whispers, which I think is a lot better. So this evolved with just coming up with a concept, asking some questions, getting some ideas, and then kind of just like brainstorming. And I really didn't have any expectations going into this other than I was just going to play around with the chat GPT and with Fantasy Grounds. So with all that said, went through and did all these prompts, and it essentially kind of turned out like a world building session. So I ended up kind of coming up with the concept of the city, the factions, some recent history, like plots and such, and then some other um, things. Like for instance, there's a romance starting. It's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet story. So you got the loyalists and the separatists on both sides of the political spectrum. So the loyalists essentially are people who kept tradition, and they're kind of the sticking with the cliche that the way things used to be. And then there are the separatists who kind of want things, they want change. They're trying to break away from the old ways, the old government. So that's basically left over from this big schism that happened between two factions of the city. You had supporters of the previous leadership, and then you have these new kind of, they're individuals and groups that want change. So that's kind of where the schism is. But so, anyways, this romance is kind of new, and it's basically two individuals have fallen in love, but their relationship is kind of taboo because they're both from powerful families on either side of this faction. So it kind of has that Romeo and Juliet thing going on with the Montagues and the Capulets. So that was something that came out kind of accidentally. Initially, it was just two romantic people were going to get married and maybe unite the city. But then I got to thinking about it. I said it's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet thing. So I put that into the prompt and I said, it's kind of make this sort of like Romeo and Juliet, where it's kind of forbidden. They got this relationship. They don't want a lot of people knowing about it, and there's dangers involved and all kinds of stuff. So that's one aspect of the later um, realizations as this thing came out. But now that I'm kind of further along in this, this is kind of just going back to kind of showing my journey here. Now it kind of makes some things for the adventure, like the cover. So the Skyborne Whispers for 5e. And I've already put these into Fantasy Grounds. I might convert them to WebP, but I don't really have to because I'm not going to necessarily distribute this. So I might just leave them as PNGs. The only thing I could say on it is maybe to keep the file size down and the overall folder sizes. And then, of course, if you're going to run it with some friends, it's always nice to have a little bit smaller file sizes so they don't transfer. It doesn't take 10 seconds for it to transfer. It only takes it a second, or something like that. But you got to decide, like, what's good for your group. But these are essentially just images that I created based off the context of the conversation. So, like, you have these two sides of this valley, and it's separated by this large kind of gap, or I guess a really steep cliff. And then there's like these bridges that span these two together, but there's like one main bridge. And these were built before the cities were built. And I think they were some kind of combination of, I haven't figured it out quite yet, but a combination of dwarves and gnomes and some other races and creatures that kind of came together and put this stuff together. And the world itself, I would think, has a little bit of steampunk, flying ships, technology, but not too much. I don't like it when it's overly so, but I like having a little. So that's kind of the idea with the world building context of it. And then I made up these spider ghouls, which I think were really kind of accidental to begin with. So these things are pretty nasty. They live on the cliffs, and they're like a hybrid of a ghoul and a spider and a bat. Essentially, they're mutations, but they can fly. They have limited flight. They have this really nasty bite where not only do they, they bite you and such and poison you, but you get an extra little bit of necrotic damage. And then they get 3 attacks. They get a bite and 2 claw attacks, or they have this web attack where they can shoot this webbing. And they're pretty nasty. And they got kind of like a matriarchal society. Not really much of a society, I guess. It was just like a brood mother. And then they hide in these caves, and they're not really good flyers. Like, they can hover, they can glide, they can kind of spiral down. They can fly fairly okay, like a bat, but they can't pick up very heavy things. They can pick up like a person or a small person or an animal or something, but it's really hard for them to pick up a full-grown adult. So they do different things to kind of to survive. So I did this whole ecology on those things, and it just kind of started going in different directions. But I did keep maintain sort of like a outline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say rewrite the intro, just so we can kind of start from a starting point. That's the intro, setup, and index for our adventure above. So I'm just, even though I've already have it, I'm going to have it redo it so I don't have to scroll through 100 times. Now, this isn't a good way to use iterations of your AI tools. So if you have a limitation or you've already done a whole bunch of them, you don't want to do this. I'm just doing this for the sake of the stream. But if you want to save that, you kind of want to plan it a little better and don't have to keep going back and reiterating the same thing. So it's a Skyborne Whispers, a 5e adventure for levels 4 through 10. So it's going to be kind of epic. I figured 12 parts. Every part has 3 chapters. Every chapter has 3 sections, and so on and so forth. So pretty big. So it says, in a realm where jagged cliffs divide the land and ancient bridges strain under the weight of pride and forgotten oaths, 2 cities cling to survival, each distrustful of the other, yet bound by stone and necessity. Above the abyss, whispers ride the mist of forbidden love, broken alliances, and shadows that glide on silent wings. As tensions rise and darkness stirs beneath crumbling foundations, you will navigate the treacherous heights of politics and fear, or vanish into the fog like so many before you. So this is kind of your stinger thing without giving away too much of the plot. And then you have your setup. So it's player count from 4 to 6 players. Levels of range is 4 through 10 with milestone progression, so not necessarily experience points. You can do a mixture of both depending on how you want to play. But the tone is kind of gritty high fantasy, subtle steampunk, kind of rare tech, unreliable contraptions, like gears and pulleys and stuff like that. Political intrigue and a tragic romance, and then creeping horror and ancient mysteries. So that's kind of the tone. And then for the core themes, you have fractured factions and shifting loyalties. There's secrets beneath civilizations. There's several vertical landscapes and myths. So there's survival in this kind of, that's part of this. The price of unity versus the profit of chaos, and predators stirring in forgotten shadows. So those are kind of your main themes of this. So adventure type, it's non-linear narrative with faction influences, evolving threats, and player-driven outcomes. So it's a little bit sandboxy, but it does balance roleplay, exploration, tactical combat, and moral dilemmas. So I usually do like a 55 or 50, 30, 20 type mix for that's the type of or style that I like the most. You got some combat in there for sure, and then you have role play and exploration. You kind of divide those two up in however you like. So the background. So the twin cities of Aelridge and Calem's Rest have been locked in a cold war for centuries, connected only by the ancient Sky Road Bridge, a relic older than either city. The Loyalists cling to crumbling traditions, while the Separatists chase progress through unstable invention. Between them, the opportunistic Cloud Reavers are basically sky pirates, and the aloof bird folk, who are kind of native to the area, navigate the winds of profit and preservation. So you got kind of like 2 minor factions, and then you have like 2 major ones. Amid this fragile balance, a forbidden romance threatens to either mend the divide or spark war. Meanwhile, the long slumbering predators, known as the Rexolith, these are the spider ghouls, awaken, hunting in the mists as ancient magic stirs beneath the stone. The players arrive as outsiders, free of allegiance, yet inevitably entangled in the fate of the cities, the skies, and the shadows below. So there is a little sidebar thing here where the GM might want to track the relationship between the factions. So the trick is to kind of remain as neutral as possible. But in some ways or sometimes the outcome of the role playing, the actions that the players take, and then some of the events will kind of make them lean one way or another. So they might go with the loyalists or the separatists. It just depends on who they identify with. And they could actually divide the party too. So it has a potential of making some interesting role play, but also the GM can track. I think I'm making a little tracker, just a graphic that has like 2 bars, or maybe just 1 big bar and then a centerpiece. And depending on what the players do, there's a little token that you move back and forth to kind of keep track of how far or how neutral they are between the 2 sides. I think that's how I want to do it. And I don't want it to be too complex because that's just adding more work to the GM. So it's adding immersion and kind of a cool concept, but at the same time, you don't want to add all this extra stuff that the GM has to keep track of. But I think just moving a token back and forth occasionally just to show the players where they're at politically with a visual image is just an easier way to represent their actions and try to keep track of it in real time. Like GM can just move the little token left or right of the center. They'll start in the center and they can go left or right depending on how far they go one way or another. I hadn't thought about it, but now that I'm thinking about this, almost reminds me of our own politics here in the States. But anyway, so there's an index here. So the first part of this is the intro and setup, which is kind of what we're talking about. And then in this part one, Whispers and the Myths, you end up arriving, you kind of start learning about the factions, and then the first signs of threats start showing up in the first part. So that's 3 chapters, and that would probably take, probably 3 to 6 sessions or something like that. Part 2, Ties That Bind, are essentially forbidden romance and smuggler secrets. So you start learning about the underbelly of the society of the cities and the pettiness and all the inner fighting and such. And then you also learn about this budding romance that's forbidden, and you might make friends with the couple and all this other stuff. So there's that. And then parts 3 to what's that, 7, it gets into faction wars, rising horrors, ancient powers, and final choices. So those are kind of like your last throws there in your major part of the adventure. So you kind of have these 2 building parts, and then the rest of them from 3 to 12 are likely going to be just the actual adventure itself. So you have the little sandboxy parts in the beginning and a few in the bulk part of the adventure. And then the rest of this is all world building kind of reference. So you have this factions and key NPC section. You have the Sky Road Bridge itself. So there's markets, there's this underbelly criminal element thing, and then a couple secrets. So that's all about this big bridge that's kind of like a living space, and it spans both sides of the city. And there's a big market there. And it's kind of a neutral ground and a place where people meet and trade and fight and everything else. So it's kind of like almost like an arena. Then we're going to get into airships, gliders, and limited technology. So gonna kind of mention the airships a little bit, the gliders, and the little bit of technology that exists. I didn't want this to be the forefront, but I certainly didn't want it to be like brushed under the carpet. So if someone wanted to board an airship or use a glider or experience a little bit of the technology, it's nice to have that in there. You don't necessarily have to use it. You can just kind of use it as a background or a backdrop to your adventure. But having that information in there, like stat blocks and specs and everything else, a little anyways, kind of helps overall in case you want to bring that stuff out during gameplay. Then we're going to talk about the Vrexolith, their lore, behavior, encounter. So this is kind of like a whole bio on those creatures. Now there's some political tools and reputation dynamics. So this is the optional part I was talking about. You can track, how far left or right they are of the center. And kind of have a section about weather, elevation, mist, environmental hazards. So being vertical, you're going to have flight. You have to know some of the hazards and some of the obstacles. Ancient lore. So this is when we're going to get into the Whisper Stones and the Forgotten Mechanisms. So what was the culture and the people who built the bridges like before, what led up to, before the cities were built. And then you got a bunch of rollable lists. So those are tables, rollable tables. So you got rumors, loot, events, and flavor tables. Some of them are like dialogue and that sort of thing. A section for magic items, rare tech relics, and unique rewards. So In this system here, I don't know if money is really a big deal. I mean, you can certainly use coin, but I think favors and trade and barter are going to be a little bit more important, or a way to acquire things. Like a good deed gets a good reward type thing. Like you do a quest, you get a thing. Just collecting coins, I don't think that's where this adventure shines here. I think coins are more like a token of debt. They don't really buy much, I would say. I think everyone mostly relies on trade and barter, and these coins kind of represent the older government. And I think they've lost value essentially because there's kind of scarce to get food and those sort of things in this area. So I think coins have a little less value. They still have value, but they're kind of like having pocket change compared to having fresh food and water. So maybe not that extreme, but anyway. So treasure doesn't really click unless it's a magic item or something, and coins and standard weapons and stuff probably not such a big deal unless you don't have any. Okay, so layers, maps, and tactical encounters. So these are going to be just like encounters that are set up, pre-set up, that you can insert into the game if the main adventure isn't working for you. So maybe I put in an adventure where the two factions are fighting, and if that's not enough, I'm going to provide a few of each. So tactical encounters, and they're not always fighting. Like sometimes it's a hazard, sometimes it might be a puzzle, it could be anything that's related to the scope of the adventure and the narrative. So it will be themed for this adventure, but it gives a GM a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more content to throw at the players, especially if the pacing is bad or something was missed. Like maybe you skipped a whole section, but you still wanted them to experience fighting a certain monster or something like that. You could throw that in. The layers is essentially just going to go into the base of operations, like the nest for these Rexolith, the spider ghouls, or the faction areas where like each political faction is, and then maybe even a couple side layers like where the birdmen live and those sort of things. And then the last thing would be the finale, an epilogue, in case you wanted to kind of keep it alive, that maybe there might be a little more after this, and then legacy path. So this is just a kind of a breakdown of the chapters. And I kind of went through and prompted all this. I didn't prompt every single one of these, but I asked it to build an index based off of the conversations that we're having. So it kind of had a lot to work with, which is kind of what you want. You want to start the conversation, but then start focusing on maybe a little bit of world building, and then your NPCs, and then some of your other like art pieces and such, and just kind of start building it. What's nice about the newer version of ChatGPT is you have these projects, which is really good because that's a way to organize your work. But then you have a new thing called library, and any images that you generate are now in a separate library. So you don't have to go through every single conversation and pull those images out if you don't do it right then and there. So I can just come here and download all the stuff that I've generated for this particular adventure. So here's an example of the spider ghouls. So this is kind of just something that came out of conversation. I really didn't quite plan it. I just wanted something different. I get tired of the same cliche monsters. So the spider ghoul kind of has the bat, but then it has a little bit of the properties of a ghoul, but then also properties of a spider. So I thought, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's kind of like a hybrid creature. It's probably got better eyesight, like vision, and then it has limited flight, and it's kind of got, they now have a history of it, and I made some like tokens for them, some pogs, I guess you could call those. So I think it turned out pretty cool. There are 3 types of these things: the brood mother or the queen or whatever you want to call it. Then there's just a standard hunter type, the regular ones. And then there's like an alpha male that's really rare, but they do exist. Like there'd be one badass out of the whole group. Maybe it's a lair guard, or maybe a bodyguard for the queen or for the matron, and then, or maybe they send that one out if the players make it to their, past their numbers. And then I'm just making pictures. There's one particular scene or one part where these things invade the city. So way I had it set up was that, there's this big riot, kind of like a fight gonna start, like a war, a civil war, and then these things show up, and it kind of forces them to work together. So not only do you have the narrative thing of the potential wedding that's supposed to unite, but I think that it also forces them to kind of face this ancient enemy and fight together. And this is also going to affect the other 2 minor factions, which is the Sky Pirates and the Bird Folk. So they will also be pulled into this war with these things. So you have that as like your overarching threat, and that kind of forces these factions to have to build at least a truce until this war thing or this invasion is over, and then then you go from there. And what I was thinking is that the 2 betrothed, or the ones that fell in love, they might die or leave or something like that, or disappear. So that may be a driver too. So there's lots of options there for how you want this to shake down. So I kind of like the direction it went. Even though I didn't control all of it, I had an idea of like the Romeo and Juliet thing kind of came out because it really reminded me of that. And then the political thing I just thought of, it kind of reminds me of what's going on now in our own real life. And then the images were basically all mostly ChatGPT, but I gave it the context and I said, I want a combination of a spider and a ghoul, and then like a bat, and that's what it gave me. And then I made a stat block for it. And then I said, well, what if there's other types? Maybe there's a female and so I got those too now. So there's quite a bit of work done through ChatGPT that would have taken me a lot longer to do traditionally. So if I had written this from scratch, typed it all out without any AI assistance, I probably wouldn't even be here. I'd probably still be working on the intro. So that's the difference in workflow and the amount of at least getting the outline done. If you don't get all the parts ready in time for your games, you can at least work on one chapter or one session, at a time if you wanted to. So the Twin Cities basically have this Cold War going on. There's a divide, and then this long slumbering predator known as the Rexolith Awaken. They start hunting in the middle of the night. They just on the cusp of a big, full, drawn-out Civil War fighting type thing, because there's already been little skirmishes. Then these things show up. I think that's a really cool way to sort of break the monotony and to kind of give everyone a common threat. So it forces everyone to work together, essentially. Maybe not as friends, but at least a temporary truce. And the players kind of arrive as outsiders. You don't really have an allegiance, but you kind of get tossed up into this mix of the politics, and you pick your allegiances, or you try to stay neutral, or maybe you go with the pirates, or maybe you side with the bird folk. So you kind of have 4 factions, really. But the Sky Pirates and the bird folk are there for relief, for immersion, and also for some alternatives in there, because I don't want just left and right. I want some more variance in there. And you can think about it, the players are almost like a 5th faction. If they stay neutral and true to each other and they don't pick a side. They kind of become their own faction, so it's kind of cool. So anyways, that's kind of how this thing goes up. So that's basically where the prompting has led me in regards to working in Fantasy Grounds. And over here, I've added some of the artwork. I'm not going to add them to the campaign images yet because I want to get them organized. So I have a subfolder. So if I click on folder here, it brings up the subfolder, and this is where the art is stored in Fantasy Grounds on my hard drive. And basically, these are all the images. And then what I did is I hit this refresh button down here, refresh folder assets, and now these show up within the game. I think they look pretty nice. So this is the cover art for the front of the, if it was an adventure or a module or PDF or something, this is kind of like your cover art here. And then I have a back cover, which is basically a scene from the invasion, which I wouldn't show this right away. But it says, in a world where cliffs divide, bridges crumble, and the shadows glide on silent wings, will you rise above the mists or vanish with them? So there's a picture of these, spider ghoul things attacking the people on the bridge in the marketplace, the open market. So this is I don't know, kind of a horror, a combination of things, I guess. And these are just images that came up. I may or may not use some of these, but I think it looks horrific enough, scary enough. And I don't mind if it has extra fingers and stuff because it's just a monster. One, two, let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the right amount. But it just, I'm not too concerned about an aberration if they have extra arms or fingers, because they kind of look right at that point. That's about the only time you can get away with that. So if you're using AI tool that still has problems with fingers and arms, make aberrations or mutants, then it doesn't matter. So that's that. And then an alternative image that I'm going to insert inside of the game that doesn't have the text, that will kind of be like in the beginning. So when you create your chapters and your sections, you can use these to kind of fill those extra spaces and gaps. Kind of like how this turned out, but I didn't see this one. The face is kind of messed up. So what you can do here is you can select like that, and then you can say, please fix the face and the eyes. But you got to have kind of some context. You don't want to just do the face. You want to have a little bit around it so that it has it has to have context. Otherwise, it'll fix that, but it doesn't have anything to refer to. So you don't just do the head. You do like a little bit around it too. You don't have to do the whole body, but you want at least so it shows the shoulders and anything in relationship to its positioning. So I'm going to go ahead and say, please fix the face and the eyes. We'll see what it does. So this is one thing that you can do that wasn't prevalent about 1.5 years ago. You couldn't even do that. So you can even go in and kind of fix things occasionally because, sometimes regardless of what you do, the prompting doesn't give you the results. It's either you're not giving it the right type of description or it just ain't capable of it. There's two sides to that. It could be a combination of both. It's not capable and you're not giving it the right information, which really is frustrating. And you'll know this eventually if you start working with AI tools. They can really piss you off. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I get to the point where a little less reliant on AI and more reliant on best practices and learn the hard way, I guess is the best way I can put it. And I've learned the hard way for sure. I'm still learning the hard way. You can't control it, but you can say, okay, I've had enough, let's fix this, or and maybe it'll work, but it doesn't always. So it's a little better. So it did fix the eyes because before it looked really goofy. I don't know what it was doing, but It looks stupid, but now that's better. I can live with that. But it took away the other set of arms, and then it made this thing way out of scale. So you see there, you have to kind of be careful what you ask for. So I just said fix the face, but I didn't give it any context. So now there's got this huge giant creature that doesn't make any sense in the context of this, unless you're just trying to make this like a montage, in which case I think would work. But this looks like a huge giant one. They're not that big. I mean, they're pretty tall and scary, but they're more man-sized, and they're not like this huge giant thing. So I definitely wouldn't use this. So I'm just going to dislike that. I'm going to say inaccurate text rendering or something like that. I don't know. It's kind of my own fault, but anyways, you get the idea that it's not perfect. So I noticed that you can sort of make a battle map. So what I wanted to do is prompt it to see what I can come up with. And I just want little sections. I don't want a huge map, but what I might do is prompt it to create a regional map that represents the different spots in the adventure. So I'm going to go ahead and say create a detailed high definition fantasy regional map of the Skyborne Whispers campaign adventure, which depicts the various locations symbolically. So it doesn't have to be accurate. I just want, an area, and then it has these symbols that imply where these things are. So say various locations symbolically as to where they are in relationship to the narrative and the cliffside environment. So like mountains, mist, the bridge, the spider ghoul lair, the two cities divided, the bird folk, and the sky pirates. So the sky pirates don't really have a lair, but they have like a kind of like a flagship. They have a larger ship that they can retreat to. They have I think they have like three small, kind of like they have three transport kind of storage like ships. They have like a mothership, and then they have like six of these like scout fighter type ships, and that's basically their little fleet. And the sky pirate airships. Use a. What do you guys think I should use for the compass? Like, should it be just a regular one that points north, or should it be a skull, or basically should it be stylized? I don't know, but maybe it'll just be. I'll just say use a visible compass to show north on the bottom right corner of the regional map. And I'm going to say no grid, no hexes required. So I don't want it to make a scale of that, because I can do it with Fantasy Grounds. And what you'll find is if you try to create a map, it will, if you say map essentially for a battle map, it's going to put the grid on there, and it's so annoying. Anyway, so that's that. And let's say use the same art style but a little bit lighter for visibility. Because some of these images I've generated are kind of dark. They're kind of hard to see. So hopefully it'll lighten it up a little, and if not, I'll just use a Photoshop tool to fix that. So create a detailed, high-def fantasy regional map of the Skyborne Whispers campaign adventure, which depicts the various locations symbolically as to where they are in relationship to the narrative and the cliffside environment. Mountains, mist, the bridge, the spider ghoul lair, the two cities divided, the bird folk, and the sky pirate airships. So use a visible, use a small, I don't want it to be huge, visible compass. So I'll have that show up in the bottom right corner. We'll see if it can handle that. So this is kind of a big prompt. We'll see how it goes. So I'll be interested to see how it does. Sometimes it does a really good job with this kind of thing, and other times it just sucks. I have to keep bothering it and trying to fix it, and it can just really piss you off. So I'll generate a detailed high-def fantasy regional map for the Skyborne Whispers campaign, the symbolic location. So the twin cities of Ale Ridge and Calem's Rest, the Sky Road Bridge, the Spider Ghoul Lair, or the Vrexolith, bird folk eyries, sky pirate airships in flight, surrounding mountains, cliffs, and mist-filled canyons. A small clear compass rose on the bottom right corner, no grids or hexes, keeping it clean and thematic, matching art style but adjusted for lighter tones for clarity. Okay, so that's exactly what I want. Sometimes I have to tell it, okay, you can generate now, because it'll say, okay, I'm going to do this, and then it doesn't. It's kind of like it's confirming what exactly I'm asking it, and hopefully it'll get it right. So it says generating your Skyborne Whispers regional map now with all the requested elements. So this map would probably tie in the locations. So I might have battle maps that I'm going to make for all the different chapters, all the different scenes, or most of them, not all. Some of them might just be an image that I use that's just going to be a flat image and a battle back and forth, like between the factions. It's not even going to be a battle map. It's just going to show one faction fighting another. The city will be in the background. Maybe there'll be a semi-transparent line running down the center, and then those two sides would have tokens on it. Throw a grid on it and use that as your kind of your narrative back and forth battle. So it's not even really a battle map. It's just a way to represent the combatants in space without having all the complications of, worrying about line of sight and all the other crap. So, you could do stuff like that to make things easier on you in certain situations. Yeah, so I don't know if that's exactly how I want it to go, but it's not exactly what I envisioned, but this would work. But it's not really labeled correctly. It kind of has an idea of what I wanted, but yeah, I think maybe this is too much up here. Like this would have been the bird folk area, this the sky bridge, Calem's Rest. So it didn't label everything properly. So let's try this again. I'll say recreate the regional map without the text labels and focus on the details and the images. So maybe it just needs a break, because sometimes if you give it too much, it just cannot handle that many things in one image. So you might have to just make the background and then make all the little assets separately and then just merge those together with Photoshop. So it can't always do everything. You might have to do it in pieces. So that's another thing that you want to keep in mind with generative AI tools is like this might have been asking it a little bit too much. It seems like a simple request, but if you break that thing down, and there's a lot of stuff it has to consider, And then I think the real problem is it's trying to fit all of that in one small area. And that's the part that sucks. Create now, darn it. For some reason it says I'll recreate it and I'll do it, but then it doesn't. And it says generating now, and it doesn't do anything. So I have to say, okay, create it now. So we'll see what it does. But I may not even worry about this right now until I get the story further along, because if you do this stuff too early and then you add things later on as you're developing your adventure, you might need to change all that. So that's another consideration. So you might want to make the regional map or the final kind of map that ties everything together at the very end, just in case you insert more things. Then you got to go back and fix it. So, maybe just do the background for now and then put the little pieces in later. So I might have it just make all the symbols and just put them where I want them to be. Like the little bridge and those little cities and stuff, just have the symbols there. And then just use the background image as kind of like a theme. It doesn't have to be perfect. So we'll see what it does. It's really trying to do it, but I think that was much. Yeah, so far without the labels, it's doing a little better. I can tell. So what I can do later is go into Fantasy Grounds and put the labels in myself. So here's the bird folk. Yeah, I can do that. I can live with that. So these would just be symbolically like where these things are located. And then later on, I would pin on top of these where these things might show up in the adventure. Like if the players board the airship, I might put a pin there and then have a separate deck plan for the ship. So that's something that you can consider. So let me select this, and I'm going to say to remove that. We'll see if it's usually pretty good at erasing stuff, but it's not always so good at redrawing them. So if there's something you don't want on there, you can sometimes fix it without without asking it to do the whole thing over. So that could be something that you could do it. I've had only probably about 50% success with that tool. I may not be using it right too. So maybe I'm not giving it the right prompt, or maybe I'm not giving it enough information. See here, it says, please specify the parts you'd like. See, it wants more. So just highlighting it didn't work. I'm not going to worry about it. But as you can see, you got to be a little bit more descriptive. So move these. I'll say remove these random shadows from the image to clean up the artistic clutter. And look, it made the face wrong here. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to do it this way. What I'm going to do is probably just have it render this part in the background, and then I'll put all these in myself. Because it did okay. And see, like this thing didn't turn out right. So like I said, the more you don't use, like I should have used the original and then just highlighted some things I wanted to change. But see, this doesn't even really look like one of those creatures. Yeah. So I don't know. Pick your battles on that, because that may or may not fit your narrative and may not do exactly what you want. So like I said, you can't really control the AI tools. You kind of have to go with it, or kind of accept what it's giving you in a lot of cases. Otherwise, you're just getting frustrated. Or if you're good with Photoshop, just use it as a starting point and build from there. I think that's what a lot of people are doing now, is they may not be using strictly AI art, but if they need textures or just to have this main kind of overall thing and then suggest them as they need it, I think that's what a lot of people are doing now, instead of, oh, I don't use AI art. Well, yeah, you do, but you're just not using it straight up. You're just replacing it and then stealing not really stealing, but borrowing the textures and the colors and whatever it is that see, I would use this and then place all of my different locations in here. So this one I can live with. It's artistic. It kind of gives you the vibe of the scene, and then it just gives you the depth that you need for this. Is kind of like not really a map, but like a representation of the different sections of the adventure. And then you can just put in your own stuff. So you can do stuff like that, or you can start over and just try to do something else. I kind of like this image better than this one because this is, I don't know, I like the style over here better than this one, but this would work if you were going to share this with your players, just to give them an idea of the world, the setting. So I don't know. It kind of depends. So what I want to do now is, let's see, let's create a party token, like a faction token. So create a high definition fantasy pog with a silver, I'll say with a thin silver border, and the silhouette of the 4 cliche adventure archetypes, like warrior, mage, cleric, that sort of thing, rogue, with a grayish blue misty background, and around the outside of the pog a plain white background. So this is going to be just like a token or a pog to represent the whole party as a group. And if you do is you can move that token between these locations to kind of show where they're at in the adventure, like progress. But then I was saying earlier that there's going to be like a faction slider where the center point is where they start, and depending on who they help and the results of different quests, it's going to shift it left or right, positive or negative, or left or right, and then that will determine which who they get favors from, or who they're getting trouble from, or non-help basically. So we'll see what happens, but I like having a party token because it comes in handy, because you can use it for, like I said, tracking on like a bar type thing where you're tracking, like, or a location, or just having a group pog. Just really helpful. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And I think it's kind of cool just to have one, because you can show it on the map, and then you can even put like lighting on it if you want, like assign a torch to it, a torch light, and have it move around on a hex map and only show certain areas at a time. So it can come in handy, when you're telling a story narratively. So create it now. See, it keeps doing that. I don't know. I got to figure that out. I got to complain about that. It says, I'll generate this and blah, 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 generating now, and it just doesn't do anything. So I said, create it now. So I just had to kind of say, okay, we're ready for you. I don't know if they're doing that to slow down how many art requests you do, but it's been pretty consistently annoying. So I'm not sure. And the fact that it takes a little longer, which I'm okay with that, as long as the images are close to what you want and they don't look too bad. I don't mind that it takes a few extra seconds, but when it doesn't do anything and I'm sitting there waiting, wondering if it's going to do something or not, that's annoying. So if it just says, I can't do this right now, there's too many people prompting, that I can live with, but it doesn't even do that. It just sits there and spins or doesn't do anything. I was like, okay, so the server's overloaded. I get it. So yeah, be cautious when you generate images, and when you're constantly prompting over and over and over. You'll run out of iterations, and then you'll be kind of mad because you can't do any more work. So save your iterations. Don't just say, oh, there's one word misspelled, redo the whole thing. You don't want to do that. You're going to run out of iterations or space. So that works. So this is just a generic kind of party token that you can use. So now what I want to do is create one for each one of the factions. So what colors should they be? We have the separatists and we have the loyalists. So should we make the loyalists gold and red and the separatists kind of purple and yellow or something? I don't know. So let's say I want to do the same POG style. So I'll say using the same art style as before, and I'm going to paste this. This is create a POG with a thin gold border and the silhouette of the separatist faction. Actually, no, this is the loyalist. The royal loyalist faction with a grayish red misty background. So the silhouette of the loyalist faction with the grayish red misty background. So this is going to be for a party token or like a representation of one of the factions. So let's do that. So I'm going to copy this in case I want to use it again. So I can live with that. So I would put that in the adventure under tokens. And then if you have a need for it, like maybe you want to represent the group on a map or like a status bar, like kind of like maybe you set up a grid or like a graphic where there's little cells in it, and each time they advance in the adventure, you just move the token forward and share that with your players, of course, so they kind of see it, and it kind of adds to the immersion, right? It doesn't add a bunch of overhead like a real map with line of sight and all that stuff, but it does add some context to what you're doing. Yeah, it must be overloaded. That's probably why it's doing this, because it's doing it every time now. This is where it says, okay, I'm going to generate it now, and it doesn't. So you might fight with this depending on how loaded and unloaded the servers are. They're running out of compute. They have added more computers and graphics cards or whatever they're using to generate this stuff, but they're getting low on power essentially, and they're getting low on server space and all that other stuff. So it's going to be to the point where they're going to have to get quantum computing going, because this is not sustainable at this rate. If they're going to grow, then the AI companies, are going to have to do something about this really quick, because it's going to get to the point where people won't use it because it's not reliable. It's still it's better than it used to be, but it's still not quite reliable enough. You can't put a whole business on it. There's people already trying to do that, and it's changing so much and evolving so much, it's really difficult to rein it in. You have to have some really good developers that can have like API tools that are going to adapt to it and that can pull the information and parse it with like a Python application or something like that. Because just doing it straight from an AI tool is probably not the way to go. So there's the separatist or the loyalist. And then what I'll do is probably, since the other ones are kind of a progressive thing, what I'll do is green with maybe a white border or something. I don't know what color border. Maybe bronze. It's kind of a brownish thing. I don't know. Maybe a purple border. I don't know. Let's see. So that's the loyalists. So let's do, using the same art styles above, create a high definition POG with a thin and I don't know what to do here. I'll say bronze, because it kind of looks gold, but kind of not. Bronze border, and this with a thin bronze border and a grayish green misty background. And around the outside of the pog is a plain white background. Okay. Well, hopefully this will work. So these are just party tokens or a representation of like the factions. And I might do one for the bird folk and then one for the sky pirates. I think that would probably have like a sky ship on here. And that way, if you have an air battle or something, you can have tokens that represent the vehicles if you wanted to. Without having this really fancy token, just have like a token, like a regular token or a pog. Yeah, see here it says generating now. Well, I see that you're saying you're going to do it, but you're not doing it. A thin bronze border, silhouette of the separatists, lighter armor, inventive or agile postures, a grayish green misty background. Cool. So we'll see what it does. So you don't have to do this. This is just kind of experimentation to show you the capabilities of this particular iteration of ChatGPT 4.0. I use the writing, the 4.5. I'm not certain quite how it works. It's supposed to be more for longer conversations with writing and getting feedback from that. I might try that, but for the time being, I'm just using 4.0. And I have a Plus account. So if you're new to AI tools, you're gonna have to get used to prompting and then learning the limitations and the strengths of your AI tools. So there you go. There's a separatist. So that turned out pretty good. So there you go. So you got like this bronze border with this green. This has a gold border with the red, and then you have this silver border with the blue. So there you got your three factions. And like I said, you can use these for different things, for tracking, like maybe, you know, you have like an area map that's not really a tactical battle map, but then you can kind of show where they are in relationship to each other, like how far away they are, or maybe this one's in this part of the city and this other one's over here in the sky ship. So let's try the, let's do the next one. Let's create the pirate one. So using the same art style as before, created with a thin, I'll say white or gray border, and the silhouette of the sky pirate faction with a grayish, I'll say purple in this case. That's interesting. Purple misty background. I'll say faction airship, because I kind of wanted the symbol of an airship silhouette. So there we go. So now we're going to have one hopefully with the airship, and that'll be for the pirates. And I think that having those different factional tokens gives you a lot more options in play. I mean, you could certainly use letter tokens, but having the color coordination, the little details like that, I think overall it kind of just adds a little bit more to the immersion instead of just a generic, okay, P for pirate, and you know that works, but I kind of want to have a little bit more oomph to it. You know, you could be doing all this in vain, like doing all this work and you never use it. So there's that too. So I'll say create it now. Create it now. So this is just an exercise in some of the capabilities that you can do with the AI tools. It kind of knows what you're saying, which is amazing, because before you had to say, okay, it has to have a red circle, it needs to be perfectly round, and you have to have the silhouette of this guy, and you'd have to detail every single thing of it. Now it just kind of knows by the training it has. I think recently, within the last year, they trained it on a whole bunch of role-playing game stuff, because before this, it was a lot harder to do. Now you can just crank stuff out. It's really crazy. I already like it. Yes. Very cool. So there we go. There's your separatists and loyalists, and now you got the sky pirates, and now for the birdmen. So what color should we make that? Like a beige color, maybe? So let's try this again. So I want an orange, a thin gold, or thin, this will be a black border. The silhouette of the birdmen. I'll say anthropomorphize. Anthropomorphic birdmen faction, or birdman. I'll say birdman faction with a orangish misty background. And that should be the last. I shouldn't have to do any more of those. I could, I guess, do one for the whatever you call them, the bad guys. That might be something to do, but pretty much this would be the main ones, though. Because I think, though, yeah, maybe I will do one with the spider ghouls. Create it, please. Don't just tell me. Yep. So that is the way that this needs to be. All right, so anyways, faction tokens, kind of cool. Imagine if you had an actual face-to-face game, you could get these printed, I don't know, at FedEx or whatever, and have them laminated. Use those on your table. It kind of depends on the play style and what you're trying to do. But I think I am going to do so using the same art style as before, create a high definition pog with a thin white border and the silhouette of the spider ghoul faction with a gray misty background. So it's got a white border and the silhouette of the spider ghoul faction. Spider ghoul creature. I think it will know what I'm saying, hopefully. All right, so this should be the last one. So there we go. There's the birdman with the orange and the black. That looks pretty good. Pretty, just having those colors can help differentiate between those. So it says, I will generate it with that, but then it doesn't do it. So do it. Just do it. Yeah, this is kind of abusing it a little. I mean, normally I would have a little bit more time in between these things. I think it does that to rate limit you in a sense without saying no. Because before it would just say, no, not going to do it. You've already got too many. Oh, I thought it was going to do that just right now. But it says, generating this now with all the requested details. I thought I was going to say, cannot do it now. You've requested too many in an hour or something like that. There's some kind of limit, and I don't remember. It's changed so much over the months. It's hard to keep track of what the limitations really are. Some of the AI tools are by money. So you don't pay money, you're not getting the iterations. There we go. Oh, that turned out really nice. It still has a little line here, so I can take that border out. Yeah, that is really cool. So there's your spider ghoul, the big bad guys in this adventure. So there's all of the tokens. So with this in mind, what I would do is you can go to, let's say, the library, and this is where you download these things. So instead of going up, scrolling up, trying to figure out where all this stuff was, you can just go to the library now and just download them all from there. Instead of trying to go through all your old conversations and picking them out of there, you'd have to do that as you go. Otherwise, you're going to be spending a lot of time going back through your conversations and picking out the images. So that's the risk of generating images as you're, making your content. My earlier examples and advice back before all this was, do it in a separate conversation. That way you don't have as many things to go through. But now you have this library thing, so I think that's helpful. So what I would do now is, once you were done with, like, say, all the pogs, then I could put it in a program like this would be this. In this case, this is Canva. So what I want to do is I want to create a design, but I want to do it with a custom size. So this is going to be the size that I want it to be, 256 by 256. That's the canvas size. Create the design. So this is how I would do it in regards to the content that I have. So going to the download section, here's all the downloads. What I would do is take all these things, highlight them, move this aside, drag it over, and let's see. Yeah, so it's going to upload all of these into Canva, and then I'm just going to individually delete and just start with this and get these centered. So you might have to play with these because they're not going to be perfectly round. That's pretty close, but if you want it to go all the way to the borders, if possible, or close, you got to leave a little gap, but not much. So I went a little bit beyond to use up a little bit more of that space. So I'm going to go a tiny bit more, and that's centered right there. And it leaves this little bit of gap so that you have a little bit of space, a little breathing room. So then I'm going to add a page, go to uploads, and use this next token. So I uploaded them all in one shot, but now I'm just going to go here and do the same thing. And they're already kind of the size that you want it to be in regards to Fantasy Grounds. So these are all basically humanoid, not really size. Well, this pirate ship might be a large one if you wanted it to. But I'm going to make them all the same size. And what I'm going to do is put TKN underscore 01 underscore party token, something like that. And then this one would be TKN underscore 02 underscore, this is the Loyalists faction. And you do that systematically because when these render, when you actually export them, you want it to keep that title so you don't have to go back and fix it later. And that helps with cut down on your time and such. And then with this particular tool, I can remove the background. So it will take the white part out. It still shows white because we have a white canvas. But when we actually render it, that white background that it showed like in here isn't going to be there. So that's nice. So now we're going to put the next faction in there, which is the Separatists. So there we go. And all I'm doing is kind of resizing these so it kind of takes a little bit more of the space here. Take advantage of the actual space because not all of them are going to render exactly the same. And I want this to be a little tiny bit bigger. There we go. And a little bit more. Let's see what this other one looks like. Yeah, it's pretty close. There we go. And you even get that crosshair so you know it's centered. And this will be the separatist. So you title it, you know, however appropriate you want it. So TKN underscore 03 underscore separatists faction. And you just keep going down the list, you know, for each one of these. So let's see. We're going to add another page, and this will be for the pirates, or sky pirates. And again, I'm going to stretch this thing out. I know it's kind of boring, but this is the actual work, right? This is where that work comes in. So when you're paying for like a conversion for either Fantasy Grounds or whatever virtual tabletop, this is what you're paying for. This takes work. This doesn't come this way. You have to adapt this to Fantasy Grounds. So someone has to go in there and meticulously do all this work. So when you're paying for it and bitching about how much it costs, this is what you're paying for, right? This is the actual work. Someone says, well, I already have the PDF. Why should I pay for the Fantasy Grounds? Well, you're paying for the adaptation of it, not necessarily the same content. So that's basically how this, you know, even if you're doing other virtual tabletops, same thing. It's not any different, and it's just work. That's all there is to it. So 04 underscore, let's see, this is the Sky Pirate faction. And there we go. So this is pretty much the steps I have to go through, or anyone who does conversions or adapts a book to Fantasy Grounds, is that dealing with all this little pieces here is a lot of work. I mean, I've found ways to make it more, you know, convenient for me, but it doesn't change the fact that you still have to go through all this stuff. And that's really what you're paying for. And I don't think people realize that until they have to do a conversion themselves, because it does take patience and time and trial and error and all that stuff. You're just going to get pissed if you think this is a cakewalk. It isn't. Even with AI tools and all these little tricks and stuff, it just takes time. So token, this is 05, I believe. Yeah, so token 5. See, I want it to sort by type and then by number. So alphanumeric and then the title afterwards. And the reason for that is when you put them in Fantasy Grounds and you know, when it sorts in the preview window, you kind of want them to sort in kind of like some sort of order. Otherwise, you're going to get confused and you're not going to know what's what. And I've gone through that so many times. I put an image in, it's got this stupid name or title like X47B15Y3. I was like, what the hell is that? Okay, so this is I always call them spider ghouls. I forget the formal name, the Vrexolith or Vrixolith. I'll just put spider ghoul faction. So that's token 5. So you just keep doing this until you're done. And that's why I recommend trying to do them all at once, because once you're in this mode, it's fine. It's not as big of a deal. But let's say you go back to writing, and then you come back over here and do this, then you go back to writing. Just that little time in between where you're switching back and forth, you lose time. And if you're in a hurry or you need to get this done, you got to find a way to do it efficiently. And I'm not saying this is the best way, but you have to find something that's going to work for you. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What am I missing here? Oh, the Birdmen. Got to get those guys. Okay, so get those guys up here. So these are essentially Aarakocra, but being that I don't want to use you-know-who's IP, I'm just saying Birdmen. Because more people understand what that means anyway, so you don't have to have the Dungeons and Dragons titles. You can use whatever title you want. So TKN 06, is it? yeah, 06 underscore bird min faction. Okay, so we got the birdman, we got that, we got that. What am I missing here? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's one more, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's right. 6 of them. So we got 6 factions. Now, if I was smart, I would do this one because this is an individual token. So what I will do is add another page, drag this one over, and what I might do is, yeah, that's a little big, so let me shrink that down. There we go. So this I might say TKN underscore NPC underscore 01, and this one I would say Vreigselith or whatever these things are called. Then that is going to go on the NPCs. So when I make the stat blocks and such, this is going to be what is on the NPC. So now I'm going to go through and make sure the background is removed on all these with the background remover. Because if I render them now without doing that, it's going to have that white border. I don't want that. So that already has it. This already has it removed. This one needs to be removed. That one's already removed. This one's already removed. Okay. So now that I got all that done, we'll say that we're all done, right? Not true, but in the case of this video thing, we want it to be done. By the way, comment on the split screen. Does that work? Because I've got people pissed off because I'll have like a screen with a little preview window, and I'll have Fantasy Grounds mostly up front. But some people say, well, I want to see the the Chat GPT part of it. So I'm trying the split screen thing to see how it comes out. Okay, so there's the tokens, right? So I'll hit share and download, and I'm going to click on transparent background. That way it doesn't count this white border, and it's going to go through 1 through 7, which is all the tokens, including this monster one, and we're going to hit download. So normally it would have 99% of those done. So I'd probably want 4, 5, probably about 10 more token types. So here's all that. Open this up. What I'm going to do is make this easier on me, so I'll cut that. That's a zip file. And I'm going to click on tokens in Fantasy Grounds. Then click this folder. And I'm going to paste that token in here. And I'm going to extract this, extract all. And then what I'll do is call this faction tokens. And then I'll create another subfolder. It will be NPC tokens. So this is how I'm going to organize the data in Fantasy Grounds. So if when I go to export it, all these things will make more sense. I'm going to cut this one out of here and put it in the other, because that's where I'm going to have to do more work, is on the NPC tokens. So now that I have all those in, I'll close that. And right now I don't have a campaign folder because I haven't created anything in tokens yet. But once I do, and I hit this refresh, now you get a campaign folder under tokens. And now I'll click on the faction tokens, and here they are. So that's what they look like in Fantasy Grounds. So now you can use these however you see fit. So if you're a GM and you want this party faction token, you can drag this down to the hotkeys, and then when you have a map or a status sheet up, you can just drag that up there and put it on the map, and it can be interacted with and moved around. With players, I think they can do that as long as it's, as long as they can see the token. And that way you can use it for status or whatever you need these for. So that's just a use case there for Canva and for ChatGPT and for Fantasy Grounds. And when you want to start putting together the adventure, what I would do is go to books, go to campaign, and build out the entire index. So up here, I have like an index that I made earlier, or that I had it redo. This. So I would build this in here, just the skeleton of it. So you would give it the title and then make the index page itself with this stuff in here in text format. And then what you do is build every single chapter in every single one of these and then populate them as you develop those, or develop it first and then copy and paste them all in as you're creating it. I think it's better to have the skeleton in there, so that way you know what you're going to be working on next. It kind of gives you another way to check to see what you've worked on. And then you can drag links, or you can make blank links so you know that something needs to be linked there. So when you're building your page and you insert a blank link, when you go back through all the chapters and the pages, you say, oh, something needs to be linked there. It'll be either an NPC or an image or whatever it needs to be, table. And that way, as you're doing this, at the very end, you link everything together. But this is just going to be this will be like the new, so this was called Skyborne Whispers. And then you would make your subchapter, which would be this introduction and setup. And then there would be a chapter in there possibly. So here's the subchapter. So this is the introduction and setup. And then you would do your pages if you had pages in there. So that's kind of how you'd want this to, how this would be laid out. And then on this actual page, new page, then you would put whatever you need to, page number maybe, and then either a title block, header block, whatever. So in this case, this is like the header block, but I want, let's just say, I'll do Skyborne Whispers campaign, something like that. And then here, this is your frame selection, but you can put whatever you want here. So whatever you want for your intro and setup. And then if you want an image, we'll put an image block in there. And then we can take the images from our assets. So Skyborne Whispers, and we will take that image that didn't have text on it and drag and drop that in there. So now you have an image that relates to the campaign, and you put your text underneath here, your intro, whatever you want to do. So it's kind of up to you, how you want to arrange this, but you can also do left to right. So you can have a left column or a right column. You can create just another text block and have links and stuff in there. You build your index, you can have every chapter indexed, kind of linked in there so you can easily go to that chapter and do all kinds of stuff with this. So this just kind of makes it more convenient, but then you click on campaign is where you can start building your book. So it kind of depends on what you're doing and how you want to arrange it. But I think that's all I'm going to do for now. Hopefully these videos have been helpful for you. If you missed out on some of the prompting tips and such I did yesterday on Friday. So if you want to watch that video, you're welcome to. And then this one kind of gets more into the fantasy grounds part of things. And then also on world building and the different tools you might employ when you are designing your content for whatever, if it's homebrew or you're doing a conversion, whatever. So this is kind of cool. So this was going to be like the rear cover, but I didn't really like this huge representation, but it kind of has like this montage feeling. So I might use that. We'll see.